I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished witnesses today as our subcommittee focuses on the capabilities of the United States Coast Guard for safeguarding our national interests in the Arctic region. We will be having two panels today. First, we are pleased to have the Vice Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Charles Ray, who's been doing an outstanding job in his position. And then our second panel will be of experts Major General Randy Key, who will be remote, as well as Stephanie Madsen, Executive Director at Sea Processors Association from Juneau, Alaska, and Dr. Jennifer Francis, also coming via remote means, is a senior scientist at the Woodell Climate Research Center in Falmouth, Massachusetts. Last year, this subcommittee held a hearing that focused on the Arctic strategy released by the Coast Guard in April of 2019. That strategy prioritizes three lines of effort, one of them being the need to enhance our capabilities for operating in the Arctic through persistent investments in infrastructure, assets, and personnel needed to close gaps in presence, particularly given our rivals in the Arctic, China and Russia, communications, and domain awareness in this region of growing global focus. Today's hearing will focus on those needed investments in our Arctic capabilities, progress that has been made in obtaining them, and the vital work that still needs to be done. The Arctic has shifted from an area of cooperation to the next region of great power competition with our near-peer competitors, China and Russia, outpacing the United States in the development of ice-capable vessels and investments into Arctic infrastructure. The U.S. only has two polar icebreakers, and a fire aboard the Healy this summer has put half of America's polar icebreaking fleet temporarily out of commission. As a result, the Polar Star is now America's only operational icebreaker, while Russia has approximately 54. This gap in capability creates space for Russia and China, which now has more icebreakers than we do, to exert maritime influence in the Arctic, which they are trying to do, and amplifies our existing vulnerabilities for vessel traffic safety and security, maritime law enforcement, fisheries resources management, search and rescue, and environmental response. We've seen Russia push all in on controlling the Arctic. Russia has opened 16 deepwater ports, 14 airfields, built Arctic military bases, and even formed a new Northern Arctic Command. In fact, Vladimir Putin has referred to the Northern Sea Route as the new Suez Canal, which he says Russia intends to fully control. He has made major military investments to secure this route for Russia, and his government has even threatened to sink foreign vessels that do not have a Russian pilot on board or a Russian escort vessel. In recent months, Russian provocation has only increased. The Russian Navy conducted its largest war game exercise since the Cold War near Alaska. This exercise extended into the U.S. exclusive economic zone. Our commercial fishing fleet encountered a frightening situation in close proximity to a number of fishing vessels and directed them to immediately depart their legal fishing grounds. These were Russian warships, pictured here, and this graphic provided by the Coast Guard shows the locations clearly within the U.S. exclusive economic zone where our fleet was legally fishing when the Russian warships and aircraft, including submarines, pictured here above, ordered our fleet to leave the area. Without persistent U.S. presence in the Arctic, we risk leaving an opening for these types of aggressive actions to continue. Recognizing the importance of these critical gaps, Congress has already made steady progress towards authorizing needed investments. Currently, the closest U.S. deepwater port to the Arctic is Dutch Harbor on Unalaska Island. which is 1,000 miles from the Arctic Circle. Not very close. In May, the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works, on which I sit, passed the America's Water and Infrastructure Act, advancing the long-needed Arctic deep draft port at Nome, Alaska, as the first in what we believe needs to be a series of strategic Arctic ports that is a major step forward for our nation in protecting America's interest in the Arctic. The port in Nome will not only be a critical component for Arctic maritime transportation, it will serve as a staging area for search and rescue, pollution response, and security operations with the Coast Guard and the Navy. In June, the President weighed in on the importance of acquiring a polar security ice-breaking fleet that can project persistent presence in the Arctic. With the release of the President's memorandum on safeguarding U.S. national interests in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. This presidential memo adds weight to the efforts in Congress to authorize and fund new polar security cutters. 2 years ago, I was able to get authorization in the NDAA for the construction of 6 polar-class security cutters to start building our ice-breaking fleet. We have followed up with the funds to build the first, and we are working on appropriations to secure the second appropriation funding for the second polar-class icebreaker. I am disappointed, however, in what I believe is the Coast Guard's lack of strategic vision for where to home port these new icebreakers. While making sure there are budget imperatives and plans for grouping similar assets together in fewer locations for cost savings, I believe this is not something that should override the operational imperative to base Coast Guard resources and cutters close to where their mission is. That's what the President's memorandum asks for, particularly as the Arctic has emerged as a critical area for great power competition. And the ice-breaking vessels we are building and will likely be leasing need to be able to operate and be stationed near the Arctic or in the Arctic where the action is. I have just spoken to the National Security Advisor, Ambassador O'Brien, and I believe he shares similar views on these issues. These investments in our Arctic capabilities will help ensure that the United States does not cede any more ground in this strategic location. Without further investment in our polar capabilities, our adversary's influence will grow, and if that happens, we risk our ability to protect U.S. vessels, conducting commerce, to enforce international law, and to defeat threats to our national security. With that, I want to thank our witnesses for participating in our hearing today to discuss this very important topic. I now want to recognize the chairman of the committee to see if he has any opening statements, and then I will turn to Ranking Member Senator Markey. Chairman Wicker.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sullivan. And I think it's noteworthy that we're having a hearing on the Arctic, and it's about 62 degrees in this hearing room. I don't know how our capable leadership managed that, but I think it's very appropriate. Maybe we need to have a hearing about the tropics next time. But in all seriousness, great to have Admiral Ray back with us and the other distinguished panel. And thank you, Chairman Sullivan, for your leadership on this important issue. Access to the Arctic's vast energy, mineral, fisheries, and other commercial resources is expanding, and international competition for these assets is intensifying, as the chair has just so ably stated. America's two nearest peer competitors, Russia and China, have both declared the region a national priority and have made corresponding investments. By contrast, U.S. investment in the Arctic infrastructure and capabilities has not kept up with our economic and national security interests, and I want to be a teammate of our subcommittee chair in rectifying that discrepancy. The U.S. Coast Guard is on the front lines of strategic security competition in the Arctic. The Coast Guard has operated in the Arctic since 1867, when, through the foresight of Secretary of State William Seward, America purchased Alaska from Russia. The Coast Guard's diverse set of Arctic missions includes search and rescue, enforcing laws and treaties, environmental protection, facilitating commercial trade, and protecting national security. The Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet acts as the nation's principal tool to conduct many of these critical missions. And I have to stretch to call it a fleet. The current icebreaker fleet is well past its service life and in dire need of replacement. Longstanding concerns with the icebreaking fleet's size and age were underscored on August 18, 2020, when the Coast Guard cutter Healy, a medium polar icebreaker, suffered an engine fire, forcing the ship to return to her home port in Seattle. That fire has left the Coast Guard operating with a single icebreaker, the Polar Star, until the Healy can be repaired. During a visit to Alaska, hosted by the distinguished subcommittee chairman in August of last year, just before the fire, Admiral Ray and I flew out and landed on the Healy in the Arctic. So I have witnessed firsthand the critical capabilities of this vessel and of its dedicated crew. The Healy fire, combined with recent aggressive Russian naval exercises in the Arctic, demonstrates the need for more U.S. icebreakers. The Coast Guard will now have to stretch the service life of the Polar Star, the nation's only heavy icebreaker, until 2023, extending its lifetime to nearly 50 years, well beyond the intended 30 years. In stark contrast to the American fleet, Russia currently has 4 heavy nuclear-powered icebreakers and 11 medium icebreakers, with 3 more under construction and 11 additional icebreakers planned in the next decade. The Coast Guard has stated repeatedly that it requires at least 3 heavy and 3 medium polar icebreakers to fulfill its ice-breaking mission. The Coast Guard has awarded a contract for the first 3 heavy polar security cutters, and we hope there will be more to come. And if I have anything to do with it, I want to be a teammate with our distinguished subcommittee chairman in that regard. But in addition to new vessels, we need shoreside facilities, piers, and support personnel to sustain a fleet of polar security cutters. So we have our work cut out for us. I hope our witnesses will underscore the need to prioritize and accelerate the polar security cutter acquisition program. Icebreaking capacity and supporting infrastructure are just 2 of the many challenges facing the Coast Guard in the Arctic. On that visit to Alaska with Senator Sullivan, I spoke to the Coast Guard service members at Air Station Kodiak and aboard the Coast Guard cutter Douglas Munro about their role in protecting our ocean environment and marine life. The Commerce Committee is working to help the Coast Guard promote fisheries development, enforce our fisheries laws, and respond to fisheries disasters. Alaska and my state of Mississippi may be thousands of miles apart, but we share a major interest in fisheries, and the Coast Guard is protecting them every day. We hope to address these and other challenges in the Coast Guard Authorization Act, legislation co-sponsored again by our distinguished subcommittee chair, Senator Sullivan, which we are optimistic will pass in the next few days. I look forward to this discussion. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I believe Senator Markey is having a bit of a issue getting on the video here, so we're going to...
I think the equipment is frozen up.
We're going to go directly... We're going to go directly to Admiral Ray for his opening statement. And I do want to mention, Mr. Chairman, with you and the Admiral's help, right now, it's looking like the NDAA is going to have the Coast Guard Authorization Act. This has been a goal of mine since I got here to pair those up. I think it's a good precedent that hopefully won't be a one-time occurrence this year, but something that we can look at doing every year, and I know the Coast Guard has been supportive of that as well. So that's good news. Admiral Ray, you've been doing a fantastic job in your role, and I look forward to your testimony, 5 minutes oral testimony, and you have a longer written statement, we would be glad to put that in for the record. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, Chairman Wicker. Thank you for having me here. And before I get started, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Commandant and on behalf of all the men and women of the United States Coast Guard, we pass our sincere condolences as you mourn the passing of your dad.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Yes, sir. I want to thank you all for your unwavering support to our service and for this opportunity to update you on the Coast Guard's efforts to protect American sovereignty, promote economic prosperity, and expand American leadership across the Arctic. The rapidly changing physical, operational, and geostrategic Arctic environment is driving increased activity in the region, and with it, increased risk across the maritime sector. While our mission in the high latitudes have evolved since 1867, our commitment to the region has not. We are leaning forward to address the safety and security to our Arctic residents and the mariners who make their living there, home porting new offshore patrol cutters, fast response cutters, investing in Alaska real estate infrastructure, and prioritizing our operations in the region. The Coast Guard is also deeply concerned by the rising strategic risk to our nation as China and Russia compete for diplomatic, economic, and strategic advantage in the Arctic. Both nations have publicly declared the Arctic a strategic priority, and they continue to make significant investments to advance their own interests. Russia continues to invest heavily in icebreakers and Arctic infrastructure, better positioning themselves to shape the security and geopolitical environment in the region. They're focusing on developing the national resources, expanding their icebreaker fleet, and imposing strict governance on the Northern Sea Route. I'm especially troubled by Russia's recent military exercise in the Bering Sea that the Senator referred to. In late August, they conducted a live fire exercise in an area that extended into the United States exclusive economic zone, as is shown on the chart. Their irresponsible execution of this phase of their exercise created confusion and potentially unsafe interactions with American vessels legally fishing in our EEZ. Our longstanding operational relationship with the Russians enabled us to kind of, through a red phone type scenario, cut through the red tape and let them know of our concerns of what was going on that day. As you know, Senator, we sailed Alex Haley up there to investigate and provide awareness. However, I am disappointed that Russia chose to push the boundaries of responsible behavior in the Arctic, and in doing so, put Americans at risk. China also aspires to assert influence across the Arctic, leveraging economic investments and natural resources and infrastructure, and expanding their icebreaking fleet. This summer, they launched the Shuilong 2, which operated in the high Arctic. China's announced plans for 2 additional icebreakers, threatening to outpace our icebreaker building program. The casualty, as Senator Wicker mentioned, Coast Guard Cutter Healy this summer demonstrates our nation's lack of capacity for icebreaking and emphasizes the critical importance of the Coast Guard's Polar Security Cutter fleet. As was stated, we will begin construction of the Polar Security Cutter in 2021. It'll be the first time we've done this in over 40 years. We've contracted with Halter Marine in Mississippi to design and build up to 3 Polar Security Cutters, and we appreciate the continued support from Congress and this committee in particular to build the next generation of assets. Our Coast Guard's Operation Arctic Shield continues to be the primary operational means of protecting and executing our sovereign rights and responsibilities in the U.S. Arctic. Our flexible expeditionary approach has never been more important. As Alaska cruises were canceled this summer due to the pandemic, we redirected resources to conduct additional patrols to monitor foreign research vessels and to enhance policing of our maritime border with Russia. For the first time since 1984, as you know, the Coast Guard will conduct operations north of the Arctic Circle during this winter. When the National Science Foundation, as a result of a caution for the pandemic, decided they did not want to send Polar Star to McMurdo in Antarctica, we immediately came up with a different sail plan for her, and she's underway as we speak today. Straits of Juan de Fuca, heading north towards Dutch Harbor and then further up into the Arctic. I think this demonstrates the Coast Guard's agility and the importance of the polar security cutters, the need for a larger icebreaker fleet to persistently safeguard our nation's economic and national security interests in the high latitudes. While we're focused on protecting sovereignty in our U.S. Arctic, the Coast Guard is also working to build partnerships across the Arctic. This past summer, we deployed 2 medium endurance cutters to participate in search and rescue and military exercises off of Greenland. Operating with our allies Denmark, France, and Canada, we work to establish the things that you do when you exercise together. Never has Coast Guard leadership been more important in the Arctic than it is right now. As we shape the region as a safe, cooperative, and prosperative domain for all, you have my commitment, the commitment of our commandant, and that the Coast Guard will continue to assert all efforts to meet this challenge. Thank you again, Senator, for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Admiral, and I think we're going to just start right in as we, when Senator Markey is available, we will make sure he has an opportunity to provide his opening statement. I want to begin by commending the Coast Guard on its decision to have the Polar Star do the Arctic Patrol this winter. And can you provide an update on the status of the Healy and how extensive was the damage, and when do you think the Healy will be operational again? I had the opportunity to meet with the captain and the ship's leadership crew, just a couple months ago when they were in Seward, Alaska, and it's a great crew, so I'm glad everybody's safe, but an update would be appreciated.
Yes, sir. Well, it's a great. I'm proud to report to you. She's in the yard at Mare Island, the upper reaches of San Francisco Bay, and they've done work on her before, so they're no strangers to it. The motor that we had to replace was 115 tons of motor. We had one spare. Somebody had the foresight years ago when we commissioned Healy. We had a spare. We actually built a building around it in Curtis Bay at our shipyard. So we had to ship it. It was too big to ship by rail or truck. We had to put it on a barge and ship it through the Panama Canal. And we got her, the motor is replaced inside Healy. We expect her to finish her dry dock availability towards the end of this month. For that, she'll enter a dockside availability or a home port, and she'll be ready to sail next summer, sir, to go back up north.
Great, thank you. Admiral, I'm sure you're familiar with the memorandum from the President on June 9th of this year regarding the Arctic and icebreakers and where to look at home porting them. Are you familiar with that? And one of the things that I have been pressing literally everybody listed on that memo, the Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of State, OMB Director, National Security Advisor, is the importance of when we look at icebreakers, and I think everybody recognizes the need to build a fleet, because we really don't even have a fleet, but to make sure they're home ported in an area in which they are in the region. Can you talk about that? Because right now, when I talk to the senior officials listed on that memorandum from the President on America's national security interest in the Arctic, to a person, they recognize that home porting icebreakers in Alaska makes long-term strategic sense and is in the long-term strategic interest of the United States of America. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, you know, I love the Coast Guard, but sometimes I get a sense of kind of a strategic thinking deficit on these kind of issues where too much of the home porting decisions seem to be based solely on where the current crew is, not where the action and the presence is needed. So can you talk to me about that?
Yes, Senator Sullivan. So with regards to the President's memo, as you know, that was a joint effort between the Coast Guard and Department of Defense, NOAA, Department of State, and so we got together and and created a document in response and turned it in on time to DHS, and that was submitted to the NSA. So when they will choose to release that, I'm not certain to say at this point. But as you asked during the course of this time, we did in our response say that Alaska home ports should be considered in the analysis. And as I think you're aware, right now we have an ongoing home port analysis for polar security cutters that's ongoing. We expect that to complete in August and then to report out by the end of this fiscal year. So, and that will definitely include analysis of home porting options in Alaska.
And so your timeline for completion of that is August?
The report, the homework will be done in August. And I'll double check this, but this is what I recall from memory. The homework will be done in August. And then we will have the analysis of it and, and running it, working it through our review process by the end of the calendar year.
Let me ask with regard to leasing. I just talked to the National Security Advisor. I know that there are icebreakers that are being looked at in Finland. Last week I chaired the Readiness Subcommittee hearing on the Armed Services Committee with the Secretary of the Navy, CNO, Commandant of the Marine Corps. He had talked about this issue. There's another icebreaker that's in Florida, I guess. Not sure what it's really doing in Florida. But the look in terms of the potential to lease those soon, these are medium icebreakers. It would essentially bridge the gap that we all recognize we have. My understanding is the White House, National Security Advisor, possibly the Navy with regard to some of their funding are looking at moving forward on leases soon, like hopefully as early as the end of this month. Do you have any comment on that? And do you support it?
Well, sir, Senator, with regards to leasing, that was obviously a part of the presidential directive to investigate that, and we went about that with the Joint Navy and Coast Guard team. We've gone about investigating the feasibility of using those vessels for our purposes. Along the way, as we've said consistently, and it was accepted by those at the NSA and others, was that any leasing arrangement would not be in lieu of building our own icebreakers. This would be in addition to.
As I fully agree with that. In addition to, as a bridge.
Yes, sir.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes, sir. And I think it is there is a potential that one of those vessels could be of benefit as a bridge, as you say.
Good. Okay, Admiral, sorry, I'm just trying to get a sense of, sometimes these remote hearings, you got to get a sense of who's on the line and who isn't. And so for now, we don't have anyone on the line, so I'm going to continue my line of questioning. With regard to the leased icebreakers that we're looking at, again, just speaking to the National Security Advisor about an hour ago, and I would fully support it as chairman of this committee. There's also an interest in possibly, if we do lease medium-term icebreakers in the near future, to at least have, again, those home ported or have one or two of those home ported in America's Arctic, which is Alaska. Give me a sense of what goes into the cost-benefit analysis, because to me, and again, to so many that I've spoken to, it seems to be a strategic no-brainer that if the entire point of having an icebreaker is particularly to protect the interest in the Arctic, to have it in the Arctic. Right now, the home porting in Seattle is a couple thousands of miles away, as you know, from the Bering Strait, where a lot of the action is, and of course the Arctic Circle. So give me your thoughts on, again, what we could do with medium icebreakers right now. Again, I think the White House is looking at something that could be home ported hopefully soon in America's Arctic, which is in Alaska. But what are the different things that the Coast Guard is looking at? Because as I mentioned in my opening statement, sometimes it just seems very frustrating that a pretty obvious choice, long-term strategic thinking would be you'd want these home ported, at least some of the fleet in America's Arctic.
Senator, with regards to the potentially leased icebreakers, short-term bridging strategy,
Yeah.
we have, we have not invested significant effort in analyzing where we would sail those from. I think, obviously the closeness, the geography of the mission set that they'd be engaged in, your point is well made. For longer-term basing of our icebreakers, as you and I have talked and the commandant have talked, there are multiple factors that we consider when we talk about the ability to maintain. We realize that through your work on the committee that you will provide the resources we need.
We will.
Yes, sir. We appreciate and understand that. What we look at is the mission effectiveness, our ability to bring those to bear in a reasonable amount of time so that we can have a high probability of success when we do sell that cutter. That's part of the calculus. There's other parts of the calculus with regards to the ability for the coasties assigned to the cutters for their families to live and prosper in that vicinity. So as we talk about longer term home porting of cutters, as you and I have discussed, those things are still, those are elements that we consider alongside the geographic considerations for getting to the op area soon, as you've described.
Let me ask another related questions. I know that, as you mentioned, there's feasibility studies with regard to home porting of the polar security cutters in Alaska, possibly Australia for the Antarctica mission, and also the FRC's, the feasibility study for with regard to the ability to protect America's interests as it relates to China. So I know that there was a look at Guam and maybe even American Samoa. How are those feasibility studies going? Now I'm talking Alaska, Australia, and then for the FRCs, Guam and American Samoa.
Well, Senator, as I said earlier, the feasibility study for the home ports of the polar security cutters, that's ongoing right now. So I don't have any specific response with regards to some of the home ports that were mentioned in the president's memo.
Okay, and just to be clear, sorry to interrupt, but those are for the sixth authorized polar security cutters that were authorized in the NDAA. So the longer term ones that we're building, not necessarily the short-term bridging ones that have the potential to be leased in a much shorter amount of time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So we're still working on the analysis of the home ports for those, as we've discussed. With regards to the fast response cutters, I want to thank you in particular for your support for our ability to home port those where they need to be in Alaska. So as you know, we're building, thanks to the support of this committee, we have funds already designated in Kodiak to start building out the piers there. We have funds on the unfunded priority list for Sitka, and so we are tracking with regards to basing those in Alaska where they need to be.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Then with regards to fast response cutters in the South Pacific, the discussion about potentially home porting one in American Samoa or one in, we've already got two in Guam right now that are there. But the one in American Samoa, that's been a discussion, and we are analyzing that, but we don't have that cutter's not on budget yet. So we will continue to analyze that and see what we come up with.
Okay, good. I believe Senator Markey is on the line, so I'm going to recognize him next, and then I will turn to Senator Scott. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the great work in putting together this very important hearing. First, I want to thank our distinguished witnesses as well, including Dr. Jennifer Francis, who is a senior scientist at the world-leading Woodwell Climate Research Center in Falmouth, Massachusetts. What is often thought of as the frozen Arctic is actually not so frozen anymore, making it a complex and fast-changing environment that has caused a host of new and evolving national and economic security issues for us to confront. And we know that many of these changes are driven by the human-caused climate crisis. If we don't talk about the effects of climate change on the Arctic, we can't fully understand the true threats to our security. A novel Arctic climate is emerging in its new state, according to recent research, quote, extremes become routine. Rising temperatures are causing the region's climate to shift from sea ice to open water and from snow to rain. These changes in the north are sadly mirrored in the Antarctic, where the Pine Islands and to Waite's glaciers are breaking free. The collapse of these ice sheets will have immense implications for rising seas, with Massachusetts and other coastal states facing up to 10 feet of sea level rise. Together, these climatic changes in polar regions are of incredible concern to our country. And as I mentioned before, the Arctic in particular is warming twice as fast as the global average. Between 1992 and 2019, Arctic sea ice shrank by nearly 1 million square miles, an area larger than the state of Alaska. Current Arctic sea ice extent is the second lowest on record. With new trade routes opening and towns being flooded, the changes are drastic and unfolding at an unprecedented rate. The effects are felt far afield from the Arctic as well, with impacts in lower latitudes on weather patterns, extreme events, and of course, sea level. We have also seen wildfires in places that few would have expected decades ago. In 2019, areas within the Arctic Circle experienced a massive fire season. That was supposed to be a freak occurrence. These fires weren't projected by scientists to start until mid-century. As the climate crisis continued to worsen, but now researchers say that the 2020 Arctic wildfire season, a previously unthinkable concept, is likely even worse than the one before. When I consider the changes in the Arctic, it is with great sadness and appreciation that I remember a climate scientist and climate change pioneer, Dr. Conrad Stephan. He was a leading researcher on the consequences of climate change in the Arctic, who died in a tragic accident in Greenland this past summer. I met with Dr. Stephan in 2007 in Greenland and heard about his research, which found that climate change is causing the ice sheet in Greenland to melt at unprecedented speeds. And sadly, because of our failure to heed the canary in the coal mine and take the drastic action on climate change, the ice sheet is now melting twice as fast as it was during that visit 13 years ago. As the chairman knows so well, the Arctic region is not some far-off remote expanse. It provides livelihoods to many. It is a global fishing center. It is a cultural and sacred place for Arctic indigenous peoples. It is the home of rare and endangered species. It is security. It is now at immediate risk as a result of the human-caused climate crisis. The Arctic is a keystone of our climate system, which means that Arctic security is a national security issue affecting all Americans. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I want to thank you all for the work you do. And I'd like to ask you, Admiral Ray, last year we spoke about the Coast Guard's oil spill preparedness. The Coast Guard had previously acknowledged, quote, shortfalls in its abilities to respond to any oil spills that might take place in the Arctic. In July of 2020, a Russian power plant experienced a massive failure that dumped tens of thousands of tons of diesel into the polar Arctic, showing how immediate this threat is to the fragile Arctic ecosystem. Admiral Ray, since we spoke last December, what specifically has the Coast Guard done to improve its oil spill response capabilities?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Several things to kind of, if you will, work to the left of an incident we've worked on. This summer during Operation Arctic Shield, we made a concerted effort to get out, and we visited at the end of this summer, when you put it with the work we did last summer, we had visited 92% of the facilities that store petroleum products in the Alaska Arctic. And as a result of that, we were able to inspect them. We were able to work with the operators, owner-operators of these facilities, and work to ensure that those don't become, because as you know, the Russian spill that you referred to was caused by thawing permafrost and then the failure of a containment tank that they had that's let several thousand gallons loose. So we worked to address that, and we've actually inspected and visited 92% of those. We continue to work with federal, state, and local stakeholders to perform exercises this summer with regards to our preparation for spills. And we also
Admiral, are there additional resources which you would like Congress to provide to you to better protect the Arctic from any spills, either foreign or domestic?
Well, the work that we are doing with the Department of Defense, we're leveraging some of their resources. And Senator, there's no specific, other than the capability to move this equipment, which you are providing the C-130Js, and with additional H-60 helicopters, those would be helpful in responding to any sort of incident or spill in the Arctic. So we can provide, I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
You mentioned that permafrost is melting. Half of the world's permafrost is expected to vanish by the end of this century. But I noticed in your written testimony, Admiral, that it does not include the words climate change. Do you believe the Coast Guard should be planning for human-caused climate change?
Mr. Ranking Member, the Coast Guard has been consistent in that we are really agnostic as to the cause, but we are planning and paying attention to science all over our country, up north in particular with regards to, as you've already discussed, there's water where there used to be ice. The multi-year ice has receded. If you look at the planet from the North Pole aspect, you can clearly see greater expanses of water and that remain over the course of time. We've seen it this year in our hurricane season down on the Gulf Coast, where we had more named storms than we've ever had since we've been naming storms. So we pay very close attention to the forecast and the scientific analysis. But as I said, that's what we look at and what we build to as we're planning our operations.
Now, I know what you're saying, but you can't be an agnostic when it comes to climate change. It's what's causing the hurricanes. It's what's causing the melting of the permafrost. It's what's driving all of these changes that we're seeing. And if I may, Admiral Ray, do you think the Coast Guard needs to integrate climate resiliency into the construction of any new facilities in the Arctic?
Absolutely, Senator.
And so I just want to make sure, though, I make it clear that I thank you for your service, Admiral. I think you're really doing an excellent job, and I look forward to working with you.
Senator Scott.
First, I want to thank Chairman Sullivan for his commitment to the Coast Guard, his commitment to security in the Arctic, and all the things he's taught me about icebreakers in the last 2 years. I want to thank Admiral Ray for being here. I had no idea the importance of icebreakers until I got this job 2 years ago.
Well, being the senator from Florida, we're okay with that, right?
But I have a great help with Chelsea, who is a great, eventually will be a great Coast Guard admiral. So while the United States icebreaking capabilities have remained stagnant for decades, as we all know, Russia and Communist China continue to advance policies and dedicate more resources to capitalizing on the issues of the Arctic. China's growing influence around the world presents a clear and present danger to the stability of world markets, the security of the United States and our allies, in the quest for freedom and democracy around the globe. As we all know, we must do everything we can to make sure our men and women in uniform have every resource available to defend against the growing threat and keep our families safe. I want to thank again Chairman Sullivan. When I came up here and we were shut down, and he was a big advocate of making sure the Coast Guard started getting paid. Admiral Ray, the Coast Guard plays a crucial role in defending our nation and protecting our security in domestic and international waterways. Can you talk about the resources you think you need to remain competitive, or the U.S. remains competitive in commercial and defense activities in the Arctic, and how we can improve the coordination between the Coast Guard and the Department of Defense as we work to combat what Russia and China is trying to do in the Arctic?
Thank you, Senator Scott, for the question. With regards to the resources we need to improve our readiness, the Arctic is we use the same resources there, a lot of the same ones. And so the readiness piece of the Coast Guard that our commandant has repeatedly talked about under testimony and in various other fora, it's pretty straightforward. We've had really good success with getting the funds to purchase new assets. Where we have fallen behind is in the funds to maintain those assets and operate them. And so whereas the Department of Defense, when they went to address their readiness kind of deficit a couple of years ago under this administration, they realized about a 12% increase in their O&S funding, and we're about flatlined. And so that's a challenge. That's one thing that we need. As I've said before, some of the assets that we're using up there, the Polar Security Cutter is going to be really important as we continue to build out our Arctic capability. We are also, the chairman asked me last time I testified about our communications capability. We've made progress there, but it's going to require investments in satellite capability to communicate and operate up north. I could go through a list of assets, and sir, I'd be glad to provide a more fulsome briefing for that, but it's primarily, I would say, our readiness has to do with operations and maintenance funding for our current assets. With regard to answer your part of the question about our engagement with DOD, I think we are about lashed up as tight now as we've been on Arctic issues in particular with DOD that we've been in my lifetime. As you know, we've got an integrated program office with the Navy to help construct the Polar Security Cutters, and we've got equal roles of leadership with them on that committee, and it's been a tremendous help. I'm convinced that our ability to award that contract in April of 19 was really aided by our cooperation with the Navy and their experience with that.
Is the budget issue, you think, just tied to the fact that your budget is separate and your budget comes up through Commerce, right? And so you're not part of the DOD budget. Do you think that's the reason why it's happening?
Well, sir, we're a part of the Department of Homeland Security, and so we fall under that regime of budget distribution, if you will. We think the Coast Guard is well positioned in the Department of Homeland Security. We've got many missions that work for that. As you know, we're a military force, armed service at all times, but we also have Title 14 authority, which gives us law enforcement authority. We're a member of the intelligence community. So the Department of Homeland Security is a great place for the Coast Guard, and we think we prosper there. But when it comes to the readiness funds that are provided to the Coast Guard via the department, that's where I think we could use some support over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. And just I want to ask this very quickly and get to Senator Blumenthal, but in my opening remarks, I did mention that this is the first time, it looks like successfully, something I've talked to Senator Blumenthal a lot about as well, that we're pairing up the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act with the NDAA. That brings a lot of synergies to the DOD and, or I shouldn't say DOD, I should say Coast Guard and other services operations. I'm assuming, Admiral, you support that.
Absolutely, sir, and we appreciate your tireless efforts to make that happen.
Well, I think we're making a precedent this year, and hopefully in a bipartisan way, we can just make that happen every year, because I think it helps the Coast Guard and the other services. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Senator Sullivan, and I would just second with a great big exclamation point the fact that this pairing is not only profoundly significant and historic, but it's also bipartisan, and I hope we can continue the work together that we have started, because the Coast Guard deserves that reliable and well-merited treatment in terms of authorization and appropriation. And we're very proud in Connecticut to be the home of the Coast Guard Academy. The Coast Guard has a long and storied history in Connecticut. We regard it as kind of one of our own, and very, very grateful for the role that the Coast Guard is playing in advancing our economic interests in the Arctic. I thank the chairman for making that topic the focal point of today's hearing. I want to raise an issue probably somewhat painful to both of us, and I know that it's not within the direct purview of this hearing, so if you want to respond in writing as well as orally now, I certainly would welcome it. But as recently as this morning, I have been contacted in my office by whistleblowers from the Academy complaining about some of the racial tension, potential slurs, other kinds of abuses that are deeply troubling. These instances have been disturbing to us in Connecticut for a long time. In fact, to our delegation, Representative Joe Courtney and I have heard them for a while, and I know you're familiar with them. The June report from the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General on racism at the Academy found that the Coast Guard has failed to thoroughly investigate racial harassment allegations, including the use of racial slurs, and failed to discipline cadets who were found guilty of that behavior. The specific incidents included in the report, I think you'll agree, have no place in society, much less in the military or the training institutions like the great Coast Guard Academy that we are proud to host in Connecticut. Hate speech and race-based harassment by cadets at the Academy have gone largely underreported because of the stigma and shame attached to providing information, and sometimes they have been ignored. These experiences don't stay in New London, they affect the entire Coast Guard. As you well know, a little bit like a virus, racial hatred and tension spreads. It's a contagion that I know the Coast Guard leadership is committed to stop. And so I just want to ask you what you can tell me to update us as to what the Coast Guard is doing about this very important topic, what you're doing to monitor it, counter it. I raised this topic, certainly not cheerfully, but I think necessarily because I know, Admiral Ray, you are certainly committed to stop this kind of racial slurs or any other kind of abuse, and just want to give you the opportunity to respond.
Thank you for the question, Senator, and we do absolutely take this to heart. The report of the Inspector General from the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Riding the Ship report that were from 2019, we leaned into those in the course of the last year. We addressed every single recommendation, direction that was provided in those two reports, and we've addressed them and reconciled them in policy and procedure. More importantly, I think what we've done with those is go from not just fixing our manuals and our policy, we've created tools to put in the hands of our commanders. And I'm not just talking about the Coast Guard Academy, I'm talking about commanders writ large across the service, so that they know how to conduct an investigation. They know what they have to report up. They know we are able to track harassment so that because many times these things start with harassment, they turn into something bigger. And so we put tools in the hands to our commanders that we will use those and they're spread across the service so they can actually take action against these incidents. Taking it very seriously, sir, and thank you for bringing it.
Have you heard recent reports of these kinds of racial incidents or slurs continuing?
I have not heard of recent reports from the Coast Guard Academy, no, sir.
Since the June report, have you heard any, and what steps have you taken?
Negative, sir. I have not heard any since the June report at the Coast Guard Academy.
And
I'll double check with my team, but if there's something that happens of this nature, I get a report from our Civil Rights Directorate every month on things that happen of this nature. And so I'm pretty sure I would have heard if it happened, maybe I've, not been informed, but I'll double check and get back with you, sir.
If you could double check, I would appreciate it. And I would also be interested to know, because my time has expired, maybe you can respond in writing, what kind of comprehensive steps have been taken to change the culture and to instill in the cadets the idea that there's zero tolerance for this kind of abuse?
We will respond in writing to your question, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Ray. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and to my colleague as well. These so appreciative of you being here today, and kind of a historic day in the sense that the House is taking up the NDAA and passing legislation, including the Coast Guard, with authorization for 6 icebreakers. So we definitely believe in that mission. It's a very bipartisan effort to also fund those icebreakers as we've had in the past. And so I want to ask you, specifically about the mission moving forward. Admiral Ray, will the Coast Guard continue to build icebreakers beyond the 3 and recapitalize on these purposes of both the climate science aspect of the Arctic mission?
So with regards to your first question, ma'am, as Senator, as I know you're aware, we've talked about 3 heavies and 3 medium icebreakers. And so, and we're in the precursor stages for the requirements for the medium icebreakers at this point. So that, by the plans we have now, that would be the next evolution of building out our icebreaker fleet. However, we are always reevaluating the fleet mix that we need with regards to icebreakers. So given the support of the Congress, we'll continue to look at that and evaluate that. And so our real focus at this point, in fact, I was just down in Mississippi early last month at the Halter shipyard with our mission support commander and with our deputy commandant for operations, meeting face to face with the leadership of the shipyard that's constructing the first polar security cutter, just to let them know how important it was to us and to our nation, and they get it, and they're moving out on that. With regards to the second part of your question, Senator, I'm not sure I caught
Well,
that.
we want to make sure that, obviously it is an evolving mission, and there's the work that the Healy does, science capabilities that we don't want to get lost in all of this. We want to continue those science capabilities. I want to make sure we're also getting a workforce. Currently, you're short 400 prevention personnel, and we certainly think that the Arctic is an important prevention mission. And so we want to make sure that, we're discussing here what kind of resources that you need, what we need to do to keep the science mission and to have a workforce.
Senator, thank you for recognizing that prevention workforce. That's a part of our regulatory role of the Coast Guard, which often goes unheralded, but it's so important. As we were talking with the chairman earlier, our folks at Sector Anchorage traveled all over the state of Alaska this summer to finish out, and they ended up completing about 92% of the inspections of the petroleum storage facilities in Alaska. That's the kind of work those folks do, so bad things don't happen. So thank you for your support of that workforce, Senator.
So what do we need to do to train and skill more people?
We are completing right now, Senator, a study on it, because the way we were training our prevention officers was it's something we've been doing the same way for years, and we need to do greater effect where we have centers of excellence where we take people and just in time train them to do the missions we need. And it's much more complex now, whether it's deep water offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico or whether it's up in the Arctic oceans. And so the support for us, and once again, this comes to the readiness funding that we've been talking about, because this is human capital. So to develop that human capital, it's operations and support funding, where that's how we train people. That's how we send them to these industry centers of excellence, so our people are on the right footing to do the regulatory role they need to protect our natural resources.
Well, whatever we can do to be helpful on that front. We want a center of excellence, people trained and skilled in the Arctic. There's no difference here between Senator Sullivan and I and many of our colleagues on these issues. So thank you. And I'm just taking by, you do agree that the science mission of the icebreaker fleet should continue?
Absolutely, ma'am. That's an important part of our mission. It has been for many years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Admiral, I'm going to ask a few other follow-up questions, and then I'm going to see if Senator Markey has any, and I believe there might be one or two additional senators who are wanting to participate and coming down to the hearing room. So let me ask you, I highlighted it briefly in my opening statement, but the August 26th incident that we had with this massive Russian military exercise that went into the United States EEZ. I know that you, the Coast Guard, District 17 in Juneau, the headquarters are often made aware of these kind of exercises, coordinate with Northern Command, coordinate with the U.S. Navy. I've raised this with the Secretary of the Navy, with the NORTHCOM commander. What do you think happened that we can improve on to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again? First of all, our fishermen, in my view, should never be essentially forced out of the American EEZ when they're legally fishing. And yet that did happen because the Russians were being quite forceful. Secondly, there seemed to be somewhat of a lack of information flow. And I'm sure, and I know that because I've requested it in after action to make sure that we improve upon that, particularly as it relates to our fishermen, whether they're based in Seattle or based in Alaska. You know, this is a huge part of the U.S. economy, a huge part of my state's economy. These are great, hardworking, patriotic Americans. And can you just comment on that and how we avoid that from happening again and what steps we need to take? And if you're looking at, I know you are, but coordinate with NORTHCOM and U.S. Navy on this.
Senator, that's a multi-part question, so I'll try and answer it in the same way. First of all, as I described the activity of the Russians in planning and executing that section of the exercise, I think there's a degree of irresponsibility there that needs to be addressed and talked to, and we've done that. We've sent written correspondence. We've got a Coast Guard attaché in Russia who does the legwork passing this for the Russian. And we have a relationship with the Russian border guard that serves as a really kind of a red phone type relationship. So we're working that. With that said, this was not our best day with regards to doing our role to look after American fishermen, the U.S. Coast Guard. So I'll just be quite frank, we own some of this in that although there's about 4,000, over 4,000 of those hydro packs that come out. The hydro pack is the form of a message that would describe the area that's on your chart there. About 4,000 of them a year. When the ones are in our exclusive economic zone, we have a duty to pay attention to that. And we've looked at the ways that we would communicate that with the fishing fleet, and we did not do that day. You know, there's ways they could receive it on satellite phones and satellite receivers and other types. However, there's also ways we could transmit it and make a pointed effort. What we are doing to hopefully prevent this from ever happening again, we are having biweekly meetings with the industry groups, in particular the at-sea fish processing group that will be represented in your next panel, to understand how we can communicate that to the fleet so that the fleet knows in advance when these things that could cause a challenge to their fisheries operations. And we're dedicated to doing a better job at that. This is not a once and done thing. This is going to be a persistent effort on the part of the U.S. Coast Guard to keep that fleet informed.
Great. Let me turn next to, we were talking about the different things the Coast Guard needs in terms of its presence, its ability to do its job in the Arctic, one of which is infrastructure. As I mentioned, the Port of Anchorage, Dutch Harbor, these are about a good 1,000 miles, 1,200 miles away from the Arctic Circle. So Alaska, as you know, is a big state. Just because you're up in Alaska doesn't mean you're near at all to the action. As I like to say, that would be, you know, the functional equivalent of having a Coast Guard base in Florida protecting the interest of Boston or Rhode Island or Maine. So infrastructure is critical. We have made significant progress here on the Deepwater Draft Port for the Port of Nome, which is much more, in terms of a geographic sense, able to protect the interest of the Arctic. Last time you testified before this committee, you emphatically stated the need for those kind of ports and infrastructure. Can you just comment on that again? As I mentioned in the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Ports and Harbor bill has a very significant authorization for a deep water draft port that can handle icebreakers, it can handle fast response cutters, national security cutters, even destroyers from the U.S. Navy. What's your sense of that? I believe we need a vision for a series of strategic Arctic ports the way Russia does. Can you comment on that a little bit and how important that is to the Coast Guard?
Senator, I will. I first want to thank you for the infrastructure you provide us already. As you know, about 10% of the Coast Guard's infrastructure is in Alaska.
And we'll continue to provide that as you need it.
Yes, sir. And really specifically with regards to Kodiak, because that's our stepping off point at present with regards to all of our operations in the Gulf of Alaska or heading further out west. The Aleutians are up north into Bering and further north. As we've repeatedly said, sir, if there was a deep water port north of Dutch, as you've discussed, we would certainly take advantage of it. It would be a benefit to the Coast Guard.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask one final, actually, I'm going to just make one more point again on the leasing in the, if we were to do kind of a leasing with regard to medium icebreakers, again, I think as a bridge for some of the polar class icebreakers, I think home porting those in Alaska would make immediate sense. We look at, I know the Coast Guard has already talked about Seattle for some of the polar class ones, which building on what's already there makes sense. But as you know, there's going to be a lot more than just 2 or 3 from what we're working on. So I want to just make that a statement from the chairman's position here on the importance of that. What else do you need, the Coast Guard needs from this committee? As I mentioned, we're already working on that alignment between the NDAA and the Reauthorization Act. My goal would be to do the Reauthorization Act every year, just like we do the NDAA. It makes total sense. We should pair them. But the Coast Guard needs a Reauthorization Act every year, just the way the rest of the military does. Is there anything else you need from this committee, whether it's Arctic related or any other broad-based Coast Guard issues that are at the top of your list right now?
Senator, I thank you for your support. I think, as we've discussed 2 or 3 times here, that realization that the Coast Guard needs, in addition to the capital assets that the Congress has been so good at providing us, we need those operations and maintenance funds moving forward, because that is what makes us go and will make us be the Coast Guard we need to be. And then I would be remiss, and I would be, my coasties would be disappointed in me. You know, our coasties, when I travel around the Coast Guard, they still remember that shutdown, that partial shutdown of 2019, and how that affected them, viscerally affected them and their families. And so I would just ask for your continued support to rectifying that, so the coasties never have to, you know, if any military member is getting paid, they need to be getting paid.
I agree 100% with that last comment. And as you know, some of us worked day and night to make sure that wouldn't happen, didn't happen, got cured quickly when it did happen. And it's my goal as the chairman of this committee to make sure something like that never, ever, ever happens again. It was an outrage. The Coast Guard members, the family members, and trust me, I did a few town halls in Alaska with them. They were appropriately really pissed, and they should have been. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. I see we have one additional senator who joined us. Senator Cruz, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you also for convening this hearing and for your leadership on this issue. Chairman Sullivan is the leading champion for the Coast Guard in the U.S. Senate and also the leading champion for America leading in the Arctic, and I'm grateful for your leadership in both regards.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I will also note, Admiral, on the question you raised about the shutdown, that shutdown in 2019 was unfortunate. And Senator Sullivan and I together teamed up on legislation to pay the men and women of the Coast Guard and took to the Senate floor trying to get the Senate to adopt it. Unfortunately, a Democratic senator raised an objection and held the men and women of the Coast Guard hostage to that. And so I'm hopeful we don't see a reprise of that in the days and weeks to come. The Arctic Circle has strategic, economic, and military significance for the United States. And I want to thank the Coast Guard for your continued presence in the region, your leadership, working to protect America's interest. I've said for a long time that China is an adversary who would benefit from an American retreat. All across the globe, President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party are investing heavily in the military, as is Russia. In your assessment today, who is the dominant power in the Arctic Circle?
Senator, thanks for the question. From the analysis that we've done, I mean, obviously, if you look at the planet from the north down, looking down at the North Pole, and you can see the extensive shoreline that Russia has, you know that they are a force to be reckoned with there just because of geography. They've got the geography, and they've got the natural resources there. So in the near term, I think Russia is certainly the nation that we should really be paying close attention to. But we cannot ever take our eyes off the ball on China. I think that the behavior they're displaying in the polar regions, not just the Arctic, but the Antarctic, and not just the Alaska Arctic, but over by Greenland as well. They are displaying similar activity following, in my opinion, the analysis I've done, and this is all unclassed, with regards to, you know, they're following the same playbook they followed in the South China Sea and following the places they do everywhere else. They'll get a toehold, start working in the name of science, in the name of other things, and the next thing you know, they are moving forward their agenda there. That answers your question, Senator.
In your assessment, what would be the effect to the United States if we were to cede control of the Arctic to the Russians and the Chinese?
Well, it would be no different than ceding the Gulf of Mexico to somebody else. It's a shore of the United States. It's the approach to the United States, although it is not as accessible as the Gulf of Mexico or the Pacific coast, or name your coast. But it's the same sovereignty rules and the same, we have the duty, we in the Coast Guard, and this is what we have the duty to protect it. Now, 30 years ago, when I was a young officer in the service, nobody talked about it because of the multi-year ice had not receded. But now there's access up there that didn't exist. Traffic through the Bering Straits increased, 200% in the last 4 or 5 years. It's not going to replace the Suez Canal anytime soon, but it is growing, and the access is up there. So I would say we should be planning to be able to exert our sovereignty, protect our resources, provide support for those who the access, and these are eco-tourists, these are Americans, a lot of them, or also the folks who are Alaska natives who live and make their living up there. We need to be the same Coast Guard, I'm speaking from a Coast Guard perspective, for them as I am for any other state in our country.
You said in your opening statement that state actors, as well as non-state actors, are seeking to advance their own interests in the Arctic. What did you mean by non-state actors?
Well, the potential for IUU fishing will exist up there. That's coming. I mean, when the senator and I were in Nome summer before last, we had a NOAA.
And pretend hypothetically there were a senator in the room that didn't know that particular acronym.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. That is a scourge. It literally is one of the scourges of the planet. I would say from a maritime perspective, IUU fishing, whether it's happening in the South Pacific, whether it's happening in the Bahamas, or pick a place, off the coast of Africa, off the coast of Somalia, that is one of the most widespread degradation of resources that the planet knows, and it has effects. And so what the senator and I saw last year when we were in Nome, there was a NOAA scientist there, a really bright scientist, and she explained, she drew out a map for us in the gravel of the parking lot of the harbor at Nome, and she explained to us because pollock is the most substantive American fishery. We could probably get arguments on that from other parts of the country, but it is the greatest in capacity, what happens, and that's caught in the Bering Sea. And those pollock are moving north up towards the Arctic. Now, there's a 16-year moratorium on fishing in the Arctic that pretty much everyone agrees who has the capability to fish up there, but they'll be up there. They will be up there, and they will deplete those resources just like they will anywhere else if we let them.
And what resources does the Coast Guard need to combat both state and non-state actors in the Arctic?
The capital assets that we are being provided right now, whether it's polar security cutters, and continue to be able to build out that fleet, because what happens is, and that's why we call them polar security cutters and not icebreakers per se moving forward, because breaking ice is just a means to an end. The end is to get Coast Guard cutters with Coast Guardsmen on scene to a place where either people need a rescuing or they need arresting. And we do both of those. And so that's the resources we need. And then the aircraft, the communications capability to go with them. But in the short term, as I was telling the committee earlier, I think the operations and sustainment funds are really the long pole in the tent for our service right now.
Thank you, Admiral. And as a closing observation, I'll say I was up this summer in Alaska with Senator Sullivan, and my advice to you is for the Coast Guard to stay utterly agnostic on the malicious lie that Senator Sullivan persists in repeating, which is that Alaska is larger than Texas. And I can tell you, we Texans don't believe the lying maps that are put out, and my advice is for you to stay out of that particular squabble.
Just for your information, not only is it larger, but if you split Alaska in half, Texas would be the third largest state in the country. So and I don't think the map makers are lying, but I'm glad you were up there. And Admiral, you're very popular. There's another senator who was actually recently in Alaska as well, Senator Lee, who has joined us, and I'm sure he has some questions as well.
Utah's bigger than most states, but I feel quite intimidated. I'm not going to get into this dispute of never realized it was up for debate whether Texas was bigger than Alaska.
It's not up for debate, just for the record.
Admiral, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for all you do. The mission of the Coast Guard is absolutely essential to who we are and our ability to live our lives as we do. In your testimony, you note that the ability of the United States to lead in the Arctic hinges on physical presence in the region, so that we can defend our homeland and safeguard our own security interests. You note that this is really important for us, and we ought to stick to that this means that we need assured year-round access to the polar regions. The Coast Guard has also noted that it needs 6 polar security cutters, these PSCs, for their missions. Now, my understanding is that the Coast Guard and Navy's first contract award for a PSC anticipates construction beginning sometime next year, sometime in 2021. Is that right? And then delivery of a vessel by 2024, meaning that we may not have vessels to fully replace our aging icebreakers for 5 years, give or take, possibly a little bit more. Is that right?
That's accurate, Senator.
Now, how does this timeline harm the Coast Guard's readiness and its ability to carry out its polar missions?
Well, this timeline is it's really, at this point, it's unavoidable. We've got cutters that are over 40 years old. Well, the oldest one, Polar Star, the one that we talk about the most. And it's an interesting, so urgency, a sense of urgency has been on the Coast Guard for several years now. And I am just thankful that as a result of the leadership here in this subcommittee and the support of the administration, we are moving forward with recapitalizing. There's no time. The longest journey starts with the first step, and we're on the step.
Now, federal law generally prohibits the use of foreign contractors, foreign shipyards, for the construction of Coast Guard vessels or major components of Coast Guard vessels. It's no secret that Finland has boasted, apparently with some ability to back it up, that they could build an icebreaker within 2 years, and they could do it for less than $300 million. Now, undoubtedly, we need, for the reasons that you've stated, quite persuasively, we need to be able to compete with China and with Russia in this region in particular. In order to accelerate our acquisition based on our needs for the acquisition, do you think Congress ought to consider it in a limited manner, sort of revisiting the general prohibition on foreign shipbuilding? In other words, would or could granting some limited flexibility to our NATO partners and friendly Arctic nations to help, is that something that could help the Coast Guard acquire the flexibility that it needs to get these vessels up and running so that we can establish this presence that we need in the Arctic?
Senator, first of all, as I'm sure it's no surprise to you, we are huge fans and supporters of the American industrial base and the shipyards along the Gulf Coast and that, and I know you are too. With that said, I think the bridging strategy that makes the most sense to the Coast Guard at this point is this potential to lease one of these icebreakers, because it would need to be and we, it would have to be U.S. flagged to be able to have the authority that we use it for. So that, from the perspective we've done, is trying to bridge to close this gap that we found ourselves in. That makes more sense to me.
Okay, it makes more sense, but just to be clear, there would be no security threats associated with security issues that would attend if we were to lift this restriction such that we could acquire a vessel in a different way than current law allows. Are there any security issues that would preclude us from contracting with someone operating within a NATO power or within another friendly nation, a friendly Arctic nation perhaps, to help us meet our shipbuilding needs? Would that present any security threat?
Certainly, it depends on which one you're talking about. Not all created equal, but of the Arctic nations that I'm familiar with, that I've dealt with, security of the ones that are our allies would not be the first concern I would have.
They would not be the first concern that you would have, and would they be a concern at all? Is that a concern to have purchased that from, Finland, for example?
Is security a concern for? Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. See, my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And just one final question relates to what Senator Lee was asking about. He raises a really good point about this huge gap in capability for coverage of protecting American sovereignty. Isn't that one of the reasons the president put the memo out on the issue of, if you're not going to build, which creates some legal challenges, at least right now under current law, to lease? And that's what we're looking at doing right now, leasing potential medium icebreakers from Finland is one option. Correct?
There's been several different vessels alluded to. Some of them are Finnish origin, sir.
But to lease, to close that gap and protect that, to at least bridge that gap until we can build our own.
That is the general strategy that we've been exploring as a result of the president's memo.
And do you think that makes sense?
I think to a degree it does, sir. If, the one thing I do want to state, these vessels, I've been around them, and various commercial icebreakers, if you will, and they're not to military design with regards to communications, with regards to damage control, with regards to compartmentalization. So if we get, in some sort of, we have some sort of accident because of the nature of the work that we do. So they're a different cat. We would have to do some work to them. It's not just take one off the shelf. If it was, we'd have probably done that a long time ago.
Right.
So there will be some work required to make these for their Coast Guard. But with that said, it is the commandant's position and our position that we will certainly consider this and work to see what makes sense to bridge this gap.
Great. Sure. Yeah, certainly.
I just have to ask the question. So if I understand the point that's being made, and I think Senator Sullivan raises an excellent point. If in order to bridge the gap, perhaps we could lease something. If we could lease, for example, a vessel that's been built in Finland, that would suggest that our security needs are met by that vessel. They're certainly not compromised by that. And if the only reason why we're not securing that vessel from Finland is because U.S. law prevents it, even though we could potentially do it for a fraction of the cost and get it in less than half of the time, I would suggest that that's a question for us to consider as a Congress. Why is it that for the sake of hewing to the status quo of what current U.S. law requires, if there is no security implication from doing so, why would we need to limit ourselves to leasing rather than buying with regard to a Finnish-built icebreaker? That's a question I've got for you.
Sir, I think it's in the national interest to preserve our industrial base, shipbuilding base. And I think, history has proven that. That's what won us World War II largely. And so I think to outsource the building of new ships for the use of our military, that would be something we'd have to consider long and hard. And so my starting position is that we need to protect this industrial base, which is declining. Shipbuilding base is declining along the Gulf Coast and other places. And so anyway, that's where I stand on that.
Yeah. And I completely agree that it's a legitimate interest to maintain our industrial base so that we can have access to those things. When our own industrial base can't do things in the same way that others could do, especially with an ally, a friendly Arctic nation, I think that's a good reason for us to ask ourselves the question of whether we ought to revisit some aspects of existing law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And Admiral, I want to thank you again, not just for this hearing, but the outstanding work that you've been doing for the Coast Guard on so many issues beyond just the Arctic. I appreciate very much your testimony for this panel. The record will remain open for 2 weeks, and if there's additional questions from senators for the record, we respectfully ask you and your team to try to get back to those as soon as you can. But for now, sir, we are going to move on to our next panel, and I want to thank you again for your outstanding testimony today and your exceptional service to our nation. And please pass on to the men and women of the Coast Guard that we got their back, and we're working to try and make sure we take care of them and give them the assets and training that they need to protect our nation and do it in a way that makes all of us proud.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, and we really do appreciate your support.
Absolutely. We're now going to turn to our next panel. We have 3 witnesses, as I mentioned earlier. They are all testifying remotely, so hopefully this is going to work easily. We have Major General Randy Key, Ms. Stephanie Matson, and Dr. General Francis. General Key, we will begin with you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of the subcommittee in Washington, D.C. It is an honor to discuss U.S. Coast Guard Arctic capabilities for safeguarding national interests and promoting economic security. I respectfully commend the subcommittee's interest and support of the Coast Guard's Arctic endeavors. I have the privilege to serve as the director of the Arctic Domain Awareness Center at DHS Center of Excellence in Maritime Research, hosted by the University of Alaska. I'm also a U.S. Arctic Research Commissioner. The following reflections are mine alone and do not necessarily represent the views of the organizations in which I'm assigned or affiliated. Among my experiences in the Arctic, please know I've spent time listening and learning from Alaska's indigenous communities, gaining insights from people who have been a part of the Arctic since time began. The Arctic is exceptional. Arctic exceptionalism in size, breadth, and depth of ongoing collaboration in Arctic science and economic endeavors, indigenous peoples' concerns, military cooperation, and governance-related activities are really the envy of many across the globe. Continued Arctic exceptionalism is by no means assured, and U.S. investment of Arctic initiatives in science, economics, and measures to ensure American security and sovereignty should rightly top U.S. priorities. The opportunities of an opening Arctic are incentive for Arctic and non-Arctic nations alike to pursue easier access to extract minerals, harvest marine life, conduct maritime transport, advance tourism, and project sovereign influence. The diminishing Arctic environments is enabling rising competition between national powers. The Russian Federation's refurbished former Soviet Arctic bases built additional and is capable of projecting power to and through the Arctic. With a dominant number of icebreakers, Russia can project surface forces in multiple directions simultaneously. Russian national decision-making and defense planning are opaque at best, and Russia's Arctic military advantage should be met with resolve and strength, as America cannot afford to be perceived as weak in our Arctic commitment to the Kremlin. From my vantage, the Russian Navy's actions against Alaskan fishermen in the Bering Sea in late August are frankly unacceptable. Harassing Alaskan vessels within the U.S. EEZ should not go unanswered and should not happen again. It is important to note Russia is an Arctic nation who share a critical Arctic waterway with the United States. It is in both nations' interest to prevent conflict in the Bering and Chukchi Seas. Conversely, the People's Republic of China advances influence through the use of its economic power to gain access across the Arctic. China is normalizing an Arctic presence via nationally owned icebreakers, gaining port access, and advancing mining interests. It is not inconceivable China may conduct extractive measures closer to the U.S. Arctic Maritime EEZ than any we would like to prefer, particularly based on China's track record of environmental stewardship elsewhere. It is in our interest to find a way to decouple joint approaches between Moscow and Beijing in the Arctic region. This is possible through diplomatic rapprochement that does not condone or reward malign Russian actions, but guided by realizing there are a number of common Arctic interests between Moscow and Washington, D.C. I do believe that great power competition need not become great power confrontation. Against the backdrop of one of the most difficult operational and geostrategically challenging theaters on the planet, the selfless service of the U.S. Coast Guard makes the challenging look easy in conducting search and rescue, disaster response, law enforcement, and support to civil authorities. As a career military pilot with 30 years of service, that includes